Magic, White and Black, the science on finite and infinite life. Elemental forms being the servants of their creator, in fact his own self, may be used by him for good or for evil purposes. Loves and hates may create subjective forms of beautiful or of horrid shapes, and being infused with consciousness, obtain life and may be sent on some errand for good or for evil. Through them, the magician may blend his own life and consciousness with the person he desires to affect. A lock of hair, a piece of clothing, or some object that has been worn by the person he desires to affect may form a connecting link between himself and the latter. The same object may be attained if that person is put into possession of an article belonging to the magician, because wherever a portion of anything with which the magician was connected exists, there will a part of his own elements exist, which will form a magnetic link between him and the person whom he wishes to affect. If he has developed his astral senses, distance will not prevent him to observe the person with which he is connected. If he can project his astral form at a distance, his form may be present with his victim, although the latter may not be able to see it. If he intensely thinks of a certain place, his thought will be there, and consequently he will be there, for the thought of a man is the most important part of himself. Wherever a man's consciousness is, there is the man himself, no matter whether his physical body is there or not. The history of spiritualism and somnambulism furnishes abundant evidence that a person may be consciously and knowingly in one place, while his physical body lies dormant in another. Franciscus Xavier was thus seen in two different places at one and the same time, likewise Apollonius of Tyana, and innumerable others mentioned in ancient and modern history. The elemental sent by a magician is an essential part of the magician himself, and if the victim is vulnerable by being mediumistic, with other words, by not having his own principles held together by the power of his reason and will, the latter may be injured by the former. But the former, too, if his astral form be materialized to a certain extent, even if not sufficiently to be visible to the eye, may be injured by physical force, and as the astral form re-enters the physical body, the latter will partake of the injuries inflicted upon the former. The magician, who by the power of his will has obtained control over the semi-intelligent forces of nature, can make use of these forces for the purposes of good or evil. The helpless medium through whom manifestations of occult power take place can neither cause nor control such manifestations. He cannot control the elementals, but is controlled by them. The elements of his body serve as instruments through which these astral existences act, after the medium has surrendered his will and given up the supreme command over his soul. He sits passively and waits for what these elementals may be pleased to do. He unconsciously furnishes them with his life and power to think, and his thoughts and the thoughts of those that are present may become reflected in these astral forms, or may enable them to manifest an intelligence of their own. A medium for spirit manifestations is merely an instrument for the manifestation of invisible forces over which he has no control. And the more mediumistic a person is, the less will he be liable to exercise a will of his own. The best of such mediums have been very unjustly blamed for cheating. For a medium which would not cheat is as unthinkable as a mirror that would not reflect the objects before it. The thoughts of the persons visiting a medium and who are trying to find out his impostures are taken up by the medium and reflected by him. It is therefore not the medium's person that cheats, but his visitors cheating themselves through his instrumentality. A mirror that would not reflect all the objects that are brought before it would be a very unnatural and deceptive thing. A medium who would only reflect such thoughts as he chose to reflect would be an impostor. For being able to exercise his own will, he would not be in that passive condition which constitutes his mediumship. The adept in magic is not the slave of these forces, but controls them by the power of his will. He may consciously infuse life and consciousness and intelligence into them and make them act as he pleases. They obey his commands because they are a part of himself. The spiritualists do this unconsciously. They frequently sing at their seances to produce harmony, and they know that the more the conditions are harmonious, the better will be the manifestations. The reason for this is that the more harmony exists in a circle, the less will there be any exercise of individual will, the less concentration of self, and the easier it will be for these influences to use the will and the vitality of the sitters. These animal astral existences belong to the Kama-Rupa form of existence, and their forms are therefore too ethereal to act directly upon gross matter. They therefore need the assistance of an intermediary principle, which is furnished by the second principle in man, the combination of soul and matter called Linga Sariram. This may be furnished by the astral elements of the living, or by the astral remnants of those whose bodies are dead. The astral elements used by the elementals in spiritual seances for the purpose of producing physical phenomena are not only taken from the medium but from all present whose constitution is not strong and who may therefore furnish such elements. In seances for materializations, they are also taken from the clothing of those present and furnish material for the drapery of the spirits. And it has been observed that the clothing worn by people who frequently attend to such seances wears out sooner than usual. To bring fresh spilled blood into such spiritual seances would probably increase the strength of the materializations very much, and a knowledge of such facts has given rise to the abominable practices of black magic, which are still going on in many parts of the world, although secretly and unknown to the police. This knowledge has also undoubtedly given rise to the sacrifice of animals in the performance of religious ceremonies. A certain executioner was unfortunately gifted with clairvoyance, and after having decapitated a person, he could see the spirits of dead people, sometimes even his friends and relatives, pounce upon the fresh spilled blood of the criminal and feed on its emanation and aura. He became so disgusted that he had to resign his position. It is also a fact that at a time when the blood-drinking mania in Europe was started by medical ignorance, many people who practiced it became insane, and others became demoralized by it. The astral remnant of man is without judgment and reason. It goes wherever his instincts may attract it, or wherever any unsatisfied craving may impel it to go. If you wish to be haunted by the ghost of a man, attract him by the power of love or hate which you felt for the man. Leave some promise unfulfilled which you might have fulfilled, and instinctively the astral form of the deceased will be attracted to you to seek its fulfillment, drawn to you by its own unsatisfied desire. Such an astral form is not necessarily in any way consciously connected with the real spirit of that person, as will be clear to those who have studied the doctrines of the constitution of man. It may be merely that combination of his lower principle or his astral corpse which made up the animal man. But if the man was very brutish, having all or nearly all his consciousness concentrated into his animal elements, such a remnant may constitute all or nearly all there ever existed of that person, except his higher reason, which may have fled even before his death. There are endless varieties of combinations of circumstances existing on the astral as well as on the physical plane. There is no pattern by which all cases can be explained alike. Their study belongs to the department of necromancy. It is not his fault if you do not perceive his presence and hear his voice. It is because your astral senses are asleep and unconscious. You may feel his presence, and it may cause a feeling of depression in your mind. He speaks to you, but in a language that you have not yet learned to understand. In those elementary remnants remains that which constituted the lower nature of man, and if they are temporarily infused with life, they will manifest the lower characteristics of the deceased, such as have not been sufficiently refined to join his immortal part. If a music box is set to play a certain melody and made to start, it will produce that same melody and no other, although it has no consciousness of its own. The remnant of emotional and intellectual powers in the astral remnant of man will, if this remnant is made to speak, become manifest in the same kind of language which the man during his life used to speak. The fresh corpse of a person who has suddenly been killed may be galvanized into a semblance of life by the application of a galvanic battery. Likewise, the astral corpse of a person may be brought back into an artificial life by being infused with a part of the life principle of the medium. If that corpse is one of a very intellectual person, it may talk very intellectually, and if it was that of a fool, it will talk like a fool. The intellectual action resembles mechanical motion insofar that if it is once set into action, it will continue without any continual effort of the will until it is exhausted or comes to a stop. We often see this in daily life. There are old and young people frequently seen who are in the habit of telling some favorite story, which they have already told many times, and which they repeat on every occasion. It may be noticed that when such an one begins to tell his story, it is of no use to tell him that one knows it already. He has to finish the story in spite of himself.